Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we are going to go over some of the specifications of the brand new iPhone 17 Pro. So straight out of the box, the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max aren't configured with the optimal settings for video and photo. So we're going to go through some of those settings. So let's get straight into it. So if you go to settings and you navigate to the camera tab, you'll see that first of all, your camera control, as I often just set it to camera and I set it to double click, because sometimes what will happen is you would accidentally bump the camera button and it will obviously activate it. The cool thing is that you can customize it with like any other software. Like for instance, I can assign Blackmagic camera app to that as well. I just keep it to the normal standard native camera app. So I copied a lot of the settings from my old iPhone 16 Pro, and I had my photographic styles on rose gold. I think this is a very beautiful color. You can also adjust that for yourself. Amber, standard, gold, rose gold, bright, etc. So you can configure that, or you can just keep it standard or neutral. I often just keep it on gold because it just looks nice. Actually, amber looks very nice. So for recording video, because I am in a PAL region, I switched on PAL format. So you can either decide to set it up for 4K at 25 frames per second or at 4K 24 frames per second. This gives you the most cinematic look. The other option that you can do is you can also put it on 4K at 30 frames per second. This is the best setting for social media. So if you shoot a whole lot of TikToks and you shoot a lot of Instagram reels, 4K 30 frames per second would be the best option for you in terms of optimizing for that platform. Toggled on enhanced stabilization. You'll thank me later, especially with the main camera. HDR video high efficiency, I often just keep that off. I don't want HDR. Auto frames per second, I switch that off because I don't want my phone to jump between frame rates. So I want it to be consistent at 25 frames per second. And then also I lock the camera as soon as I start recording. I make sure that the camera's locked, and I also locked my white balance. You want to toggle that on because you don't want the colors or your white balance to shift as the scene changes. Okay, to record slow motion, because again, I'm in a PAL region, I often just keep it on 4K 100 frames per second, but you can set it to 4K 120. If you are in an NTSC region, that's usually in the US or in Japan, but everyone else is on PAL, so I just often just keep it at 4K 100 frames per second. Recording cinematic mode, if you're using cinematic mode, again, I just keep it at 4K at 25 frames per second because that is the most cinematic setting. The same for 4K 24 frames per second for those that are in the NTSC regions, US and Japan. Recording sound, I often just keep it on spatial audio. The reason why, because when you edit the audio in the camera app, you have the opportunity to adjust the sound where the focus is. So I often just keep that on, because usually when it's in a noisy space, I then take advantage of spatial audio to make sure that the sound is directed for voice. If you go under format, I often just keep it at most compatible because that's JPEG. High efficiency is usually the HEIF or HEVC format. That gives you better compression, but it's optimized for iPhone platforms. Also, most compatible is often JPEG because that is cross-compatible with other devices. Photo capture, the photo mode, I keep it at 24 megapixels. And then I switch on ProRes and resolution control, and ProRes format, I just often just keep it at JPEG XL lossy. This gives me the best quality while maintaining a relatively okay size file. And then going over to video capture, I often just switch on Apple ProRes, and ProRes recording is enabled as log. This switches off all of the artificial HDR features. And why you would want to shoot in log, I mean, if you are a photographer or filmmaker, you would often shoot in log. So if you go over to the camera app, so for those that don't know, the iPhone is the only smartphone that has its own log features. So shooting an Apple ProRes log gives you the best dynamic range when it comes to shooting on an iPhone. Often when you're shooting an HDR, it adds all sorts of different tone mapping on it. Sometimes exposure shifts. What happens with HDR. When I shoot with my iPhone, I often just shoot it with log because it gives me the most flexibility when it comes to color grading options. But as you can see in the corner here is that you don't have much space. So this is an iPhone, I think it's a 256. This is the base model. I don't go for anything bigger than that because I use something like this, an external recorder that I plug onto my phone and I plug it in here. I don't use hard drives, I just use an SD card, a standard SD card, because I'm able to record directly to an SD card and just spare my phone from, getting full too quickly. And obviously if you go and try and shoot at a higher frame rate, say at 100 frames per second, you will then need to have an external recorder to be able to record in the native camera app. And then if you go over to preserve settings, I often just keep my camera mode, I toggle that on. Photographic styles, I personally just try and keep that off because I often just change whatever I feel like in the moment to change my settings. Creative control, I often just toggle that off because I obviously jump between different frame rates. Depth control, I often just keep that on. Macro control, I often keep that on because then if you go to the camera app, I got my little kitty cat here. So I'm able to activate macro control on the native camera app. And then night mode, I often switch that on because when the light changes, it takes long exposure photos to be able to optimize in low light. And then Apple ProRes, preserve the Apple ProRes setting. I often just put this off because if I'm going to shoot in ProRes, I'll obviously consciously make that decision. So I'm not always shooting in ProRes. ProRes is not always required, so I don't switch that on, especially when I'm using the native camera app because it's shooting an Apple ProRes 422 HQ, so it fills up your phone very quickly. But then for composition, I put my grid on, level, mirror front, a camera, and then view outside the frame. And then if you go to photo capture, fusion cameras, so you've got your additional lenses, which is 28 and 35 for the main camera. And then your default, I set that to 24 millimeters, which is the 1x. I always keep that like that. And then portrait mode, in photo mode, I often just keep that on. I never prioritize fast shooting because it reduces the resolution. Lens correction, I switch that on. Macro controls on. And save capture to photo library automatically. So if you go to the photo mode, you have the option to shoot in RAW 48 megapixels for the 1x camera, 2x camera, 4x camera, and now the 8x camera. And then in your camera app, often to get like good exposure, depending on your lighting conditions, I often go and I adjust it to like -1.7. I find this has like the best setting when it comes to using the native camera app. When it comes to exposure, it balances it out really nicely. Anything between -1.7 and -7, depending on the lighting conditions, even sometimes -2, gives you the best when it comes to exposure. But now you have obviously the best camera settings for your iPhone. Take advantage of the ability to shoot all of these in these amazing formats because you're going to get the best quality out of your iPhone, especially if you're using predominantly your iPhone for photography or using it for filmmaking, video, social media stuff. These optimized settings will definitely help you get the best out of your iPhone.